Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to join Senator Capito and our colleagues in calling this hearing to order. Welcome, everyone. To our witnesses joining us today from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Major General Butch Graham. How long have people been calling you Butch?
So since I was born, so I'm a junior, and my dad took Bill Graham, so they didn't call me Billy Graham. So it was,
All right. My mother wanted me to grow up and be Billy Graham. So, and down in Danville, Virginia, we spent a lot of time in a Baptist church, so if you know what I mean. Welcome, Butch Graham, and welcome to Brigadier General Tom Tickner. Nice to see you again. And to Colonel Steve Murphy, we're delighted that you could join us today. And folks that are behind you and part of your supporting team, we welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us for what sadly has become an all too frequent issue over the past couple of years, and that is providing emergency response in the aftermath of extreme weather. Each of our witnesses comes from a different position with the Corps, actually from different parts of the country, if we're just talking about that. But they're going to be able to share with us their points of view on the Corps' response to Hurricane Ida, as well as their thoughts on investing in more resilient water resources infrastructure, on building back better, as our president likes to say. As we all know, since 1980, North Atlantic hurricanes have become more intense and, unfortunately, more frequent. This trend is projected to continue in the years ahead as our planet continues to warm. Accordingly, the importance of the Corps' emergency response services will grow as well. That's why we must ensure that all parts of our government, that includes federal, local, and state, are all working together in lockstep to improve the resiliency of our infrastructure so it can withstand these extreme storms. In New Orleans, the $14.5 billion flood protection system built after Hurricane Katrina is a good example, really a great example of a smart, all-of-government approach to resilience, one where the federal government funded the total cost of the project, and the state of Louisiana has now begun to pay back its share. We have actually a similar arrangement on the highway in Delaware's, Route 301. If you get to drive out of here and you go east from D.C. and finally go into Maryland, and finally get into to Delaware, 301, federal government funded the money, and the state of Delaware is paying it back with tolls. It's a similar kind of approach. But when Hurricane Ida made the landfall, exactly 16 years after Katrina, this new system was put to its first test. And unfortunately, it held strong and prevented the catastrophic flooding in New Orleans that we saw in 2005. And this is where we can see that federal investment in resiliency pays real dividends. But challenges still remain. One of the biggest obstacles with a project like the one in Louisiana, as well as the Indian River Inlet in Delaware, is that states and localities often rely on reimbursements from the Corps to cover the costs of operating and maintaining these projects after they are constructed. But the Corps, constrained by politics and budget shortfalls, can't always recover all these costs, leaving states and communities to foot the bills. Result is that areas strapped for resources are unable to make the investments in resilience that they desperately need. And we know that the need is real. The stakes could not be higher, including our economy, our homes, and people's very lives and livelihoods are at stake. And just look at how Louisiana fared during Ida. While sophisticated water infrastructure in New Orleans protected much of the city from flooding, other communities in the state were devastated. I think we might have a photo of that. Yeah, there we go. My home state of Delaware, which found itself in the path of Ida's remnants as the storm turned north, we experienced severe beach erosion. We experienced flooding and wind gusts of up to 60 miles per hour. And I think, do we have a picture? Yeah, this is a shot of Smith Bridge Road and that we saw. New Jersey faced similar shoreline erosion, and many of us saw the videos of water rushing through and flooding New York City's suburban systems, while the final number of deaths attributed to Hurricane Ida is not yet in. So we know of 29 confirmed deaths in Louisiana, more than 40 in New York and in New Jersey, with deaths reported in at least 7 additional states. In addition to its tragic human tolls, experts project Ida's economic impact at over $90 billion, making it the seventh costliest hurricane to hit the United States since the year 2000. Just think about that. 7 hurricanes, each responsible for more than $90 billion in economic impact, all within 20 years, 7 within 20 years. And like all major storms, Ida is teaching us a lot, including about what works and what does not work, and why we can all be thankful for the feat of human engineering that protected New Orleans, one of the nation's most vital port systems, from Ida's destruction. We must also recognize that until we address the root causes of climate change, the U.S. will continue to face natural disasters of increasing severity and intensity with even more devastating impacts. And that's why we need to rapidly and dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions while we increase investments in resilience and create a lot of jobs while doing so. Benjamin Franklin once said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and his words still ring true today. The Corps of Engineers Civil Works program provides tremendous value to our nation as the primary provider of water resources infrastructure. And with more extreme weather events caused by a changing climate, it's never been more important that our infrastructure stands up to the growing challenge and protects the people that we all represent. We look forward to hearing each of your testimonies today. But first, I want to turn to Shelley Capito, we call each other wingman, wingwoman. But we're partners in crime here, but hopefully partners for doing a lot of good. And I want to turn to her for her opening statement. We have we all have competing hearings that are going on right now. I have a business meeting going on in Homeland Security Government Affairs Committee, which I used to chair. And there's a business meeting where they need me to come and be there for a quorum and to do votes. We're going to do that at the beginning. And then you're in charge, and we can start our witnesses here, testimonies, and I'll come back as fast as I can. Thank you, Senator Capito.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. It's good to see a familiar face here, and Major General Graham, who served as commander of the Pittsburgh District. When I was in Congress, you were my Corps leader, which covers a significant portion of my state in West Virginia. Colonel Murphy, thank you for being here today and for the warm hospitality extended by you and your team to the committee staff during their visit to Corps facilities in Louisiana earlier this year. And I want to thank you also, General Tickner, for being here with us today. Thank you for your service. I know some of it has not been domestic, some of it has been international, and thank you for that. We all intently watch the impacts and aftermath of Hurricane Ida, both in Louisiana but also in the Northeast. Tragically, an estimated 82 people lost their lives and billions of dollars in damages. Those of us from states and communities that have recently experienced terrible natural disasters feel greatly for our fellow Americans impacted by this hurricane. As both ranking member of this committee and also of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, my staff and I have stayed abreast of FEMA's response to this disaster and the efforts that other agencies providing support, such as the Corps, how important that has been. By the most recent count, the Corps has more than 710 personnel deployed and received 24 mission assignments totaling $223.4 million in response to Hurricane Ida. The Corps has also issued $2.5 million in flood control and coastal emergency funds under Public Law 84-99. This funding went towards the protection and repair of critical infrastructure, as well as the provision of equipment and facilities to fight floods and maintain essential services. I, again, want to reiterate my gratitude to the men and women of the Corps for performing these critical functions. I'm also eager to hear from you how we can support the Corps' efforts to help the nation respond and recover from these types of disasters in the future. By all accounts, and our chair talked about this, the Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System, known as HSDRS, for New Orleans, authorized by Congress and constructed by the Corps after the catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina, performed as intended. The system prevented a more significant loss of life and severe damage to the city. Not all areas are covered by this system, however, and that's where we saw the devastation in those unprotected communities in Louisiana and replicated in the northeastern states. It's important that local, state, and federal partners continue to work together to identify and address existing gaps in flood risk management and coastal storm damage reduction. The $5.7 billion in supplemental funding provided by the Congress to the Corps just last week will support these efforts. Solutions will take time, however, which is why it is also important that the Corps continues to work with communities to identify and mitigate risks through its Silver Jackets program, planning assistant to states, and other authorities. Challenges with and suggested improvements to existing technical assistance program are something that I'm keen on hearing from all of you. I'm also eager to hear about how we can support the Corps' efforts to help the nation respond and recover from these disasters in the future. This committee will do its part in this process by authorizing individual projects and studies and providing programmatic direction to the Corps through biennial Water Resources Development Act legislation, which we're actively engaged in right now. In closing, let me reiterate our gratitude. And again, I want to thank Chairman Carper for having this hearing. So I would like to introduce our witnesses in the absence of our chair. First, Major General William Butch Graham is the current Deputy Commanding General for Civil and Emergency Operations at Headquarters, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where he oversees all the Corps civil works activities, a $7 billion annual program, and responses to storms and other natural disasters. His previous Corps assignments include Commander of North Atlantic Division and the Pittsburgh District, from which he hails. Our second witness is Brigadier General Tom Tickner, the current commander of the North Atlantic Division. He oversees all aspects of a $5 billion annual program that covers 6 districts, including activities in more than a dozen states, Africa, and Europe. His previous Corps command assignments include Pacific Ocean Division, Savannah Division, and Philadelphia District. Our third witness is Colonel Steve Murphy. He is the current commander of the New Orleans District, where he oversees all Corps activities in southern Louisiana, so you're a busy man. He previously commanded the Nashville District of the Corps of Engineers. I want to welcome each of you to the committee today. We appreciate your service to the country and look forward to your statements. So, General Graham, we'll start with you.
Ranking Member Capito and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today to discuss the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers emergency response to Hurricane Ida. Again, I'm Major General Butch Graham, the Deputy Commanding General for Civil and Emergency Operations here at Headquarters. I'd like to start by extending our sincere condolences to the families who lost loved ones during Hurricane Ida. Our thoughts and prayers are with those who have been impacted by this storm. As was mentioned, Hurricane Ida might landfall on August 29th as a Category 4 storm and immediately began to draw comparisons to Hurricane Katrina. As was mentioned, following Hurricane Katrina and the devastating flooding in the city of New Orleans, the $14.5 billion Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System was built. And as its name implies, it was built to reduce the risk of flooding caused by storms to the city. During Hurricane Ida, this system performed exactly as designed. While the projects the Corps builds help to reduce the flood risk of vulnerable communities, we must also be prepared to respond when some of those flood risks are actually realized. This aspect of resiliency is achieved through our emergency response partnerships with Fema, state and local governments, and our key contracting partners. In response to Hurricane Ida, as many as 760 Corps personnel have been deployed, so we snuck an extra 50 in on you. And the Corps has indeed done 24 FEMA mission assignments totaling almost $250 million. As was mentioned, under our own PL 8499 authorities, the Corps has issued $2.5 million of flood control and coastal emergency funds. As part of this massive response, with a team I'm immensely proud of, I'd like to highlight one of our missions, temporary roofing. Operation Blue Roof is managed by the Corps on behalf of FEMA. The goal of the program is to provide homeowners in disaster areas with industrial strength sheeting to protect storm-damaged roofs. This allows residents to return to their homes, restarting local communities and local economies. Since September 1st, the Corps has received over 34,000 valid requests, and as of this morning, we've completed over half. 17,000 roofs have been installed to date. To put this in context, last year for the 2 hurricanes that hit the Gulf Coast, Laura and Delta, the Corps installed 13,000. So 13,000 last year. We're up to 34,000 we need to install this year, and we've completed 17,000 to date. This threefold increase provides a perspective of just how damaging Ida was. After any event, working with FEMA, we critically evaluate ourselves to see where we can improve. For the temporary roofing mission, even though we are installing roofs at almost twice the rate as our previous efforts, we are looking for ways to get started sooner by speeding up how we get work orders to our contractors and by bringing in potentially our contractors early, pre-landfall. Looking more broadly, we continue to see record-setting severe weather events across the nation. Last year alone, we responded to 28 different disasters, including 10 hurricanes, 9 major floods, and 3 major wildfires. One of the ways we're responding to this challenge in future is by incorporating climate change resiliency into our planning process. Given the scale of climate change, a broader, more regional approach to planning for future events is required. Recently, the Chief of Engineers made a recommendation for the authorization of a $29 billion system-wide risk management strategy for the coastline of Texas. When looking at any future project, we understand that we need to comprehensively evaluate and analyze all project benefits. The Water Resources Development Act of 2020 created flexibility for the Army Corps to address the needs of economically disadvantaged communities, minority communities, and rural communities. The Act promotes an approach that analyzes multiple benefits for project justification: social benefits, economic benefits, and environmental benefits. The authorities in this Act encourage the use of natural and nature-based features, seek alternatives to accommodate for sea level rise, and inspire innovative ways to expand beneficial reuse of dredge material. We are working hard to put these new authorities to work for the American people. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. General Tickner.
Ranking Member Capito, distinguished members of the committee, I'm Brigadier General Tom Tickner, Commander of the Corps' North Atlantic Division. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some context to the Corps' response to Hurricane Ida in the Northeast region. As storm risk management is a shared responsibility, one executed best in a whole-of-community approach, the Corps partners with federal agencies and non-federal stakeholders. This collective skill set, and combined with the capability, enhanced our effectiveness in preparing for, responding to, and recovering from storm events. In my role, I'm responsible for federal engineering work in all parts of the 14 northeastern states, from Virginia to Maine. Before the storm hit our region, my districts were able to obtain reliable, advanced information concerning potential Ida impacts from the National Hurricane Center, the U.S. Geological Survey, the National Weather Service River Forecast Centers, and other meteorological data. This data, obtained through Public Law 8499 authority, assisted in the accurate prediction of potential consequences Ida could bring, and we were able to communicate this risk to FEMA and the states through the Corps' mapping systems. To manage risk to Corps-owned and operated projects, USACE conducted predictive analysis based on weather forecasts, and the division lowered its Corps' dam reservoir elevations before the rain arrived to retain the maximum amount of flood storage available to reduce potential impacts downstream. We provided early support to our state and local partners by contacting them to determine their needs. Several of our district emergency operations centers activated to provide technical assistance under PL 8499. Flood fighting materials such as sandbags, plastic sheeting, and alternate flood fighting materials were placed on standby, pre-positioned, and ultimately released as needed. When the remnants of Hurricane Ida arrived, we were impacted mostly by significant fluvial events where rainfall overwhelmed stormwater systems and inundated local streams, leading to flash flood events and isolated tornadoes. As part of our post-emergency assessments, I was able to conduct site surveys of locations within the storm's impact area. These locations included areas where the Corps has conducted studies, as in the Passaic River Basin, New Jersey, Manville, New Jersey, and in Merrimack, New York. I also surveyed sites where the Corps has active projects, like the Indian Rock Dam in York, Pennsylvania, and the Raritan River in Bound Brook, New Jersey. And I'm happy to report our projects performed as designed. Finally, I observed areas where there was significant impact, but no current Corps projects or studies, like the Brandywine and Schuylkill Rivers areas of Philadelphia. We also provided technical expertise to the states, including a Corps liaison officer to both Pennsylvania and New Jersey State Emergency Operations Centers, a subject matter expert in unwatering and debris removal to New Jersey EOC, and unwatering information for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Both FEMA Regions 2 and 3, along with the states they supported, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, were satisfied with our proactive approach to this event. In the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, Congress asked USACE to prepare a performance report analyzing how our completed projects performed. That report and other work following Sandy has heightened our intent to build resilience into our coastal storm risk management and flood risk management projects. Together with our federal and non-federal partners, we are currently completing post-storm evaluations to determine impacts and develop deficiency reports for these projects. An initial assessment showed damages incurred to some of our flood risk management project elements, which will require an investment in repairs. In addition to the repairs and maintenance we conducted on these projects, in some cases, the Corps recommends a comprehensive assessment of their status to include a review of performance criteria and recommendation for updating based on current science, recent storm events, and factors such as climate change. In common with much of the nation's infrastructure, many of our projects require a continuing investment in operation and maintenance to ensure their effectiveness. The Corps' team is committed to working together with our federal interagency, state, and local partners to provide best engineering solutions for the tough challenges facing our communities. Thank you again for inviting us to speak today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Colonel Murphy. Thank you.
Good morning, Ranking Member Capito and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Colonel Steve Murphy. I'm the commander of the Army Corps of Engineers, New Orleans District. And on behalf of my team and I, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today and discuss the Corps' response to Hurricane Ida in my district area of operation. My area of operation encompasses all of South Louisiana, from Texas in the west to Mississippi in the east. Day in and day out, I focus in large part on coastal and climate change issues. The Louisiana coast is a working coast, as the state calls it, due to the significance of its activities and waterways and their benefits to the national economy. These include 5 of the nation's top busiest ports, the Mississippi River, which is the busiest waterway in the nation and our economic artery, as well as the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, which is the nation's 3rd busiest waterway, all of which have been and continue to be impacted by Gulf storms. The majority of the state's population also lives in the southern half of the state near the coast. Coastal Louisiana sits at the epicenter of climate change. Sea level rise and subsidence coexist as threats that are major concerns for both the Corps and the state. Consequently, my major missions are navigation, coastal and environmental restoration, coastal storm risk management, and flood risk management. Flooding of any kind, whether from rainfall, storm surge, or riverine flooding, or in what has been occurring on a more frequent basis, the occurrence of all 3 at the same time is a major concern for the state and for my district. The men and women of my district are residents of South Louisiana. During a storm, they endure the same impacts of their neighbors. For them, working with our partners to ensure a promising future in coastal Louisiana is not just a professional responsibility, it is a personal commitment. During Ida, almost a third of my 1,100-person workforce evacuated out of state, to include my wife and children. Almost all of us lost power, and almost half saw some form of damage to their homes, with 37 of us experiencing so much damage from Ida that their homes are now unlivable. While we couldn't be more proud of the performance of the Greater New Orleans area's Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System and how it validated the massive national investment of $14.5 billion that you've heard about already, other parts of the state were not as fortunate. Where there was federal investment in levees and flood walls, though, the systems performed as designed. Hurricane Ida has validated and reinforced many of the lessons we've learned over the last 16 years since Hurricane Katrina made landfall. The systems that the federal government invested in, and especially the HISDRAs, have reinforced the value of the Corps' system-wide approach and demonstrated the importance of sustainability and resilience that the Corps has incorporated since then into its designs. We have projects currently underway that are now incorporating these principles outside of the Greater New Orleans area. We are now in day 40 of recovery from Hurricane Ida. I'll close by saying there could not be a better team to handle natural disasters and climate change than the team that has gathered, federal, state, and local, in Louisiana. Everyone here knows disaster response is truly a team sport. I do not think we could be working more closely or more cooperatively with the state of Louisiana than we are right now. After personally experiencing 2 of the longest lower Mississippi River flood fights in our district's history, the most active Atlantic hurricane season in history last year, the COVID pandemic, and now Hurricane Ida, I can definitively say that this is a highly functional and collaborative team that has made the USACE response in support of the state in these disasters, and especially Ida, successful. That same team spirit and cooperation also drives the Corps investigation and implementation of natural and nature-based solutions that are in sync with the state's 50-year, $50 billion coastal master plan. These include measures ranging from beneficial use of dredge material to coastal restoration to environmental mitigation to the consideration through my regulatory program of large-scale diversions in the lower Mississippi River aimed at restoring the coast and making it more resilient. I could go on, but out of respect for your time and to allow for questions, I will close there. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Colonel. And we will go to questions, and a belated happy birthday to my colleague from Maryland, Senator Cardin.
Well, Senator Capito, thank you very much. I only had 364 days remaining to my birthday, so thank you. Appreciate that. First of all, thank you all very much for your service. We really do appreciate the leadership of the Army Corps. It's critically important to Maryland. It's critically important to all of our states. I was in Louisiana, New Orleans, after Katrina. Our committee went down there to inspect firsthand the damage that was done. And it was shocking to see the amount of loss of life and of property. So the $14.5 billion investment is one that we all supported, and it worked, as you all have said. So we're proud of what we were able to do to mitigate the Hurricane Ida. We also recognize that these storms are becoming more frequent and more severe, and that we have a responsibility to deal with the realities of climate change, both in mitigating future pollutants that are eating our greenhouse, that are emitting greenhouse gases, as well as adapt to the realities. And your responsibilities on adapting to the realities, I want to just touch on briefly. Many years ago, we made a decision in Maryland to invest in beach renourishment because the northeasterners were becoming more and more severe, and we invested millions of dollars, and the result has been billions of dollars of savings and savings of life. So these types of investments really pay off dramatically. But there's also a change in the risk factors that I'm seeing in our communities, and we saw it during Ida. We've had flooding before because of a long sequence of rain and causing banks to rise beyond what they can handle, and you have dealt with that issue through your flood management programs. But in recent years, we found something different occurring, and that is the large volume in a short period of time of rainfall. That was true during Ida. So it wasn't really the integrity of the flood system, it was more the extreme amount of rain in a very short period of time. I mention that because in Ellicott City, Maryland, as you all know, we experienced in a 20-month period 2 100-year floods. But what was really unique about these floods, that we had never experienced this type of flooding before. Ellicott City is on the banks of rivers, so we've seen the rivers rise and cause flooding into Ellicott City. We had never seen the large volume of rain occur in such a short period of time that couldn't possibly be managed by the current system. So my question to you is, as we look at these new risk factors of more violent storms, not necessarily hurricanes, just a large volume of rain coming down in a very short period of time that are flooding communities, how do we prepare for this? Now, I appreciate, Colonel, you mentioning the beneficial use of dredge material. We're doing that in replenishing wetlands. That's part of our strategy, because wetlands not only manage the flooding situations, but it also manages the pollutants going into from runoff. So it's an important part of our strategy. So I'm just interested as to what your recommendations are to us to manage the realities of the current risk factors on violent storms occurring with a large amount of rain in a short period of time, which is not the way we have traditionally been dealing with infrastructure to prevent flooding.
Senator, thank you for that question, and let me address that. We have put together, the administration has directed it, a climate action plan, and it's right up with CEQ right now, and expect that to be released soon. And it has 5 major components to it, and I think those address your concerns. And those 5 major components are, we have to modernize our approach, and that's our programs and our policies to deal with a different future. We have to manage better the facilities we do operate, like the dams around Philadelphia that General Tickner mentioned. We've got to enable, as Colonel Murphy spoke to, our partners. And a lot of that's with sharing our science with them. I know some of the committee staff members went down to Duck, North Carolina, and saw some of that science being created. So we've got to share that information with our local partners. And that includes this actionable data that can stand up to scrutiny. So folks, local communities, states realize the challenges that they're under. And then finally, Senator, we've got to plan and put into operation those futures. And this authorizing committee plays a key role in that. Thank you.
I think my time is run out. I just would urge us to think about how we can work in partnership to deal with these extreme raining events that are causing communities to be extremely vulnerable. We can't, it's hard to plan for every part of our community getting an extreme weather event, but we have to have a game plan for our communities because it is occurring. We saw it during Ida. We've seen it several times in Maryland. It's unprecedented, the type of flood risk that we currently have. So we're going to be looking to you in this report to give us a game plan on how we can protect communities the best that we can from the realities of these storms. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know this hearing is on Ida, but all 3 of the individuals as witnesses here were participants in a real tragedy that we faced in 2019, a flooding case in Oklahoma where we had levees that were 75 years old and well past their normal historic lifetime, and they held up. And I can remember actually being up to my waist in water during that time, and so it was something that we were very fortunate. And since that time, we've been on pins and needles what might happen if we should get another flood. But nonetheless, everyone performed very well, and the WRDA language that we put into the 2020 WRDA system performed very well. General Graham, as the Corps plans and budgets for future projects, do you believe it's important to take into account safety of life benefits like you did in the Tulsa levees chief's report?
Senator, absolutely.
Well, this is, I have to say that we really did a good job in terms of the private sector. We had to make some changes in our current statutes to accommodate that at the time, and things did work and worked out real well. Now, we don't have many hurricanes that hit Oklahoma, but what is important to remember is that the Oklahoma is connected, as Arkansas is, to the Mississippi River through the MCARNs. A lot of people have a hard time understanding that we in Oklahoma are navigable. You know, I've probably said this 300 or 400 times in the last few years to let people know that we need to be a part of a system and participating in that system, and have actually done really good work in terms of working with the private sector. Colonel Murphy, it was, I would have to say this, I'm sure Senator Bozeman and I spent a lot of time working on these, on that, the impact of the navigation way. Colonel Murphy, is it true that getting our navigable waterways open to commerce is key to a successful recovery effort? And how does the Corps prioritize dredging efforts following flooding and storm surge events?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'd say absolutely. That's one of the first things we're looking to do as soon as we can get boats on the road and in the water. I have survey boats going out on all the federal waterways I'm responsible for to get surveys in conjunction with the Coast Guard to clear them.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the 2019 flooding was a shock and exposed a lot of gaps in our system, but we're lucky in Oklahoma to have numerous private and sector entities where we had to bend the law a little bit to make it happen. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to, for the panel, for the future, look at the authorities. What authorities does the Corps need to enable them to respond as capably as they did respond in this case? And this might be something that you could do for the record. Get your ideas together as to how can we work more efficiently with the private sector, such as we did in the state of Oklahoma. Okay? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome, all of you. I'm glad to have you here. I represent Rhode Island in the Senate, and up in New England, the most extreme climate-related shift that we have seen has been in the form of extreme rainfall. It's kind of off the charts. And in terms of a persistent underlying shift related to climate, what we see coming is sea level rise. In fact, we're going to have to redraw the map of Rhode Island to accommodate the loss of seashore and what is now land turning into an archipelago of flooded islands. Against that backdrop, we experienced dramatic failure of FEMA mapping. And I've read press reports that in Texas, FEMA mapping was off by as much as 50% when floods hit the Houston area. As a result, Rhode Island has had to do its own mapping, going back to the original data and bringing in our own scientists. And as a result, we've got a very, I believe, accurate and successful mapping tool called Storm Tools that has been run by our CZMA agency, the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. It is annoying as hell to fund FEMA and also have the state of Rhode Island have to pay for its own mapping because FEMA mapping isn't accurate. Now, I know FEMA ducked because a lot of the reason for the inaccuracy was that they would have to bake in climate change, and there are very powerful forces that want to punish anybody who talks about climate change, so FEMA took a dive on this one, in my view. But the result is one that you all have to live with all the time, which is bad maps. What are you doing to try to make sure that you're operating off of good flood maps, and when you have to come in with your emergency response, people aren't being clobbered by the fact that they didn't know they were in a flood zone, so they didn't have proper insurance, so now they're really stuck. You're in the middle of all that. What's the view from the front?
Senator, thank you for that question. In any project that the Corps does, there's two imperatives. Senator, we want to make sure that we get the engineering right, and then we want to make sure that we're in control of the projects and are good stewards of the taxpayers' money. So to your comments, to make sure we understand the topography and the hydrology, that is, we agree with you, that's absolutely essential, and that's the bedrock that all that engineering is founded upon. Senator, I'll go back and relook based on the information you provided to make sure we are indeed using the best science available.
Yeah, I think often predictions related to climate change are simply zero factored out, which is just simply bad prediction when we know perfectly well what's going on here, and you see it change, and then you act as if it's just going to go straight from here on over rather than continue its trajectory when there's zero science to support that proposition that it's going to go level state. So please take a look at that. The other thing I want to just flag for this hearing and for my colleagues, which I always do, is that, we're talking about Ida. Ida hit as a coastal flood. The Army Corps of Engineers has something called the Flood and Coastal Storm Damage Reduction Program. And in the last decade, it has run between favoring inland over coastal flooding by 19-1. That was our best year, to be at the tail end of a 19-1 losing battle, to 120-1. $1 for coast for every $120 for inland. And the FY22 budget has it at 45-1, somewhere in the middle. $1 for coastal for every $45 for inland. And I want to thank the Corps for agreeing to take a good hard look at this and try to understand exactly what the heck is going on. But when you look at sea level rise, when you look at offshore storms, when you look at Ida coming ashore as a coastal storm, the idea that you guys have set up your inland, your flood and coastal storm damage reduction program in a way that so inexplicably favors inland flooding over coastal flooding is a matter of real concern to those of us who represent coastal states and have huge flooding issues like what Storm Tools reveals about Rhode Island. So we're working on that through another lane, but I just didn't want to let this opportunity go by without raising that astounding discrepancy in what it means for my state. Thank you. My time's up.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here, and we really do appreciate your service to our country in this capacity, but you've all had outstanding careers and have just served in so many different ways. I want to associate myself with Senator Inhofe's words regarding the MCARNs, the importance of getting back on track, the benefit to the economy, all of those kind of things. He truly has been a great champion and great leader in that for many, many years, and it really is important, not only to our states, but to the economy of the entire country and really the world. So, Major General Graham, media reports indicate that the cost of damage from Hurricane Ida could be as high as $95 billion. This compares to $170 billion resulting from Katrina, $131 billion from Harvey, and $74 billion from Sandy, according to estimates by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In your testimony, you discussed how our country invested $14.5 billion to reduce flood risk in New Orleans. I like how you use the term invested instead of appropriated or obligated, because infrastructure projects truly are an investment, especially ones such as the Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System that did protect New Orleans, which saves this country money, and more importantly, saves lives. I guess the question is, do you believe the American people received a good return on their $14.5 billion investment? If so, why?
Senator, thank you for that question. I think certainly it was a great investment. I was able to go visit Colonel Murphy about a week after the storm hit, and I was expecting to have to stay out in Mobile or maybe up in Baton Rouge. But a week after the storm hit, the amazing city of New Orleans was back on its feet. And it would not have been back on its feet if it wasn't for that $14.5 billion investment.
Very good. Colonel Murphy, in your opening statement, you talked about the team effort between the federal, state, and local government, tribal and levee boards to address the issues caused by Hurricane Ida. In your opinion, how much does it help the Corps when they are able to lean on their non-federal sponsors? And what are the benefits of having locals side by side with the federal government when addressing the aftermath of extreme weather events? And I would say even not only the aftermath, but the precursor.
Senator, I say in short, having a single non-federal sponsor through the state has been invaluable. Just during this storm, I was talking to the governor directly via phone call and text. I was talking to Chairman Klein with the state's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, and I push out what we call LGLs, local government liaisons, but Corps employees directly to the parish and levee district emergency operations centers. And that communication that has facilitated really has created we like to say, a one door to the Corps approach, whereby questions, concerns, friction is immediately identified and we can solve problems. So it helps quicken our response. And I would attribute really a lot of the communication that exists right now to why we've been successful to date.
Colonel, what other core constructed flood and storm damage reduction projects within the New Orleans district, apart from hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system, were impacted by Hurricane Ida, and what is your assessment of their performance? I had the opportunity to be down there in Congressman Scalise's district, which is, butts up to New Orleans, and after Katrina, and I know that there was tremendous impact there. Sometimes we leave those areas out because of the focus, on the bigger centers. But tell us what else was impacted.
Thank you, Senator. I'd say
Assessment of their performance.
like I made during my opening remarks, any federal system performed as designed. We didn't see any major overtopping, and certainly not on the hurricane storm damage. Outside of that, though, we have over $1 billion in BB-18 supplemental projects that we didn't see any major impacts on. Sadly enough, for the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain project, unfortunately, that was not in place. The good news is we're actually moving forward. We've let contracts. We just let the first contract on that, and that will reduce risk to Laplace, which was one of the most heavily impacted areas to the storm. And with those contracts in place, really the majority of them this coming year in 2022, we'll be well on our way to completing that project.
Very good. You've got a good story to tell. That's great. Thank you.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. After I question, and the chairman's given me this time, I have to go to another 11 o'clock meeting, so I want to thank you. So I'm going to start with you, Colonel Murphy, on a quiz. You said navigation routes, the busiest is the Mississippi, the third is the inland waterway. What's the one in the middle?
Senator, it's Ohio.
I was hoping you would say that. It just happens to run right along the western border of my state. Major General Graham, thank you. This is the second time we've gotten to work together, so this is great. I'm going to say something that we talked about pre-disaster mitigation and how important that is and it's interesting to hear my colleagues talk about these really flash rain that just sort of sits, and that was our last flood in 2016. It was very devastating, as you know. But what we hear from our local partners sometimes, and even FEMA in some sense, and I'm not laying blame here, is that sometimes the processes to get help are so daggone complicated. And so you've got an opportunity through the climate program that you said you wrote that has 5 different aspects to it, to, I think, really streamline some of these. You know, if I look at my cities and towns and counties, they don't have flood disaster experts. They've got somebody that's tasked with that, but they're also tasked with traffic or some other trash pickup or some other functions because they're spread pretty thin. You all have all that expertise, and I think as much as you can streamline those processes in working with your local partners, certainly in New Orleans, they have a lot of experience with it, but what we found was it was just chaos, but managed chaos. But I think we could have done better with it and recovered quicker had we had a little bit more hand-holding and simplistic way to react to some of those. So I want to ask you, I just put that on your radar screen. We have just appropriated $5.7 billion in supplemental appropriations in the continuing resolution. And I was wondering, you know, your process and timeline for expending these funds, if you have any ideas on that, and also will you make sure that those that information regarding this funding, when we make requests for information, that comes in a timely fashion.
Ranking Member Capito, in terms of transparency with to respond to the committee's requests, absolutely, we are absolutely committed to being responsive on those. To the timeline on getting that $5.71 billion that we just received at work for the American people, we're working on that right now. We're looking at the investigation projects, the construction projects. Certainly we're looking at the Mississippi River projects and the O&M work that we've got. And our goal is to, as with any of the disaster supplementals, is to get that work delivered as fast as we possibly can.
What's the timeline stretch on that, on those dollars? Do you know?
Ma'am, I don't know. We'll get that answer back to your team.
Okay, thank you. General Tickner, I think we were all astounded when we saw the video of the post of, well, it wasn't the post, it was the Hurricane Ida flooding the subways in New York City. I think it was something we hadn't really ever anticipated. What do you attribute that to? Was there something, again, here that a pre-disaster could have been better performed to be able to mitigate that? Because we saw, obviously, as the Colonel said, the pre-disaster that we did in response to Katrina actually prevented a lot more damage in Ida. So what do you see in the Northeast in terms of very unlikely places to see pictures like that?
Ranking Member Capito, I appreciate that question. And as an engineer, we all watched what happened in
Right.
New York City. We don't really have a project there that takes care of that. But what happened was a large amount of rain fell in a very short period of time, record levels, and their storm water system, the drains, couldn't handle it. So the roads turned into rivers, and water went to the lowest point, many of which was a basement. There were a lot of rescues that happened in the basement. Then there was also folks trying to drive through that storm water, which once you get out of your vehicle, you're now fighting the water, and the power of water, it will overtake. Flash flood, where we're not putting in a project, it's about education and letting people know this risk is out there. Don't go into the water. Regretfully, some people lived, in the basements, and hopefully that problem is being corrected where they have a way out.
Well, I would say that the bill that we passed, the Safe Drinking Water, Wastewater, and then as was incorporated into the BEC, in terms of trying to manage or trying to modernize some of these old storm systems. I don't know how old New York City's storm system is, but I would imagine it's in excess probably of 100 years. Certainly, we have systems that old in our state, and then to try to manage that. So this is where I think if we do on the front end what we know to be have fallacies on the back end, we're going to end up saving money, saving lives, saving property. But we got to make these processes for communities and states to access these dollars so where they actually feel like they can work with you and work with other local partners, FEMA and whoever, to be able to get these projects up and running. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate all your good hard work. Thank you.
Senator Capito, thanks so much, and thanks for keeping the trains on time. Well, I was trying to do wear two hats at once.
on time.
No, the Army's always on time. So it's the Navy we worry about, right? They say that as a retired Navy captain. No, I like to say different uniforms, same team. There we go. How's that? Colonel Murphy, let me just say this could be for anybody, but in terms of the what we witness in New York, Greater New York, the subways flooding and that sort of thing. My sense is that with the climate change, we're seeing more intense rain. In some cases, we're seeing storms that just like hunker down and like sit on an area for a while and just create a lot of flooding. Is that a fair characterization or not? Anybody?
Chairman, I believe it is, that's a fair characterization. And that massive rainfall events that we weren't expecting is, I think, what caught a lot of people by surprise. We saw the tragedies in western Tennessee with some of the mountain flooding in the valleys where we tragically lost some lives this year. And if you would ask somebody in New York City, do you think that could happen here? I'm going to guess that they probably said it couldn't. So I think education on this coming out of this is probably our best defense. Yeah.
Gentlemen, anyone else want to comment? I know that you weren't trained. I wasn't either in weatherology or meteorology.
I'll just mention a little bit maybe beyond New York City, but where we've started to build over the last 100 years in the floodplains. That is something that I know our state partners are very concerned with because they don't want it just to do projects. They would like to do natural and nature-based features and non-structural, which could be moving people out of the floodplain that exists today.
All right, thank you. I want to put a human face on it. So when Hurricane Ida came up the East Coast, it spawned some tornadoes. One of those tornadoes ripped through an area just on the other side of the Delaware Memorial Bridge, and it struck the family farm, a number of them, but also the family farm of Katie Grasso. We know her; she's my communications director in Delaware. Lives in New Jersey, and her family, their family farm was destroyed, houses, buildings, equipment, and. So we know that's a human face, and people that we know, and there are a lot of other folks that are suffering, are suffering today still as a result of all of this. But Hurricane Ida was the first big test of the new hurricane storm risk reduction system, and by most accounts, maybe by all accounts, it was given an A. I didn't get a whole lot of A's when I was in school, but that's very encouraging to hear. I got a few, but this system, however, is only part of the picture. It doesn't function without tireless communication and collaboration with other critical players. My question this would be, I think, Colonel, for you, please. Please tell us about the differences between the Corps' response to Hurricane Katrina and Rita and the response to Hurricane Ida. What were the biggest changes and lessons learned from previous storms that you put into use in responding to Hurricane Ida?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd probably spend 30 minutes, but I won't. I would tell you a big difference is the systems approach that the Corps now uses. Before Katrina, it was the Hurricane Protection System, and it was a system in name only. It allowed water into the city via canals, and it was incrementally funded. So I'd say a huge change is the Corps approached it as a system, which I think has application to what this committee is interested in, is how do we get after coastal resilience, how we get after flooding, is looking at things as a system. So that full federal funding, key lesson learned, allow the Corps to move forward. All the talents and the technology that the Corps had, we see today in the system. It allows decisions to be made that are not funding-based, but they're risk-based, and you see that in what performed during Ida. I'd say we have a willing federal partner, a single federal partner that did not exist between Katrina. And now with the state, I work with the Coastal Protection and Restoration Agency, and they work with the levee districts. Now, the communication is back and forth, but I have a single state sponsor who is responsible for working real estate issues, who I work with on payback, all the kind of issues. And then really third, I'd say another key enabler was the alternative environmental arrangements. There is no way to build the kind of infrastructure you need without having some kind of environmental alternative arrangements to allow you to move quickly. Now, we still met those environmental requirements, but what really Congress allowed, working with CEQ after Katrina, we were able to move forward very quickly.
You didn't need 30 minutes, but you have 27 more minutes. We'll just put that in the bank, okay? I'm going to turn next to General Graham for a question pertaining to climate change and project design. As I mentioned earlier, the intensity, the frequency, the duration of storms has increased significantly. And as climate continues to warm, our climate continues to warm, hurricane intensity and rainfall are only projected to increase as we continue to experience the impacts of climate change. The way in which we approach risk reduction must take these factors into account. My question is, and I'll ask you to be fairly brief on this because I want to recognize Senator Kelly shortly, but does the Corps currently account for climate change in its design process for flood risk management projects?
Sir, it does. Absolutely. I'll give you a very quick example.
Sure.
We're working on a project. It's on Highway 1, which goes down through the Florida Keys in Monroe County, the southern tip of Florida, and we've formulated that project, we designed that project for the high sea level curve, because one of the aspects is raising Highway 1, the only road in and out. So we have the authority to use the higher sea level curve, and that's what we're using for this project.
All right, good. I have a follow-up question for the entire panel. I'm going to yield to Senator Kelly. He's a man on a mission, and he can ask his questions and head on to his next assignment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all the witnesses today for being here. General Graham, this question's for you on emergency preparedness in Arizona. You've spoken both in your testimony about the lessons that the Army Corps of Engineers learned from Hurricane Katrina and how those lessons informed the Corps' response to Hurricane Ida. But of course, the goal of emergency preparedness should be to be ready to respond to any catastrophe the first time. And with a changing climate affecting all aspects of the country differently, preparing for the worst-case scenarios everywhere is even more important. That's why I was pleased to see that the Los Angeles District partnered with the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs in early September to host an emergency exercise to plan for a scenario where above-average rainfall in Arizona causes the Corps' Painted Rock Dam near Gila Bend to fail and risk significant downstream flooding. So, General, can you describe the value that tabletop exercises like the one hosted in Arizona can provide to the Corps as you prepare for the worst-case scenarios? Like, what value do exercises like these provide for the Corps as you work to respond to the real-world damages like those caused by Hurricane Ida?
Senator Kelly, certainly thank you for that question. And we were all watching the monsoon season, very, very wet monsoon season down in New Mexico and Arizona closely. So those exercises that our South Pacific Division did in the Albuquerque District were absolutely key to making sure that the partnership that Colonel Murphy spoke to that worked so well within the state of Louisiana, that we build that connective tissue within our state partners in Arizona. It's the make a friend before you need a friend. And it's really all about trust. In the middle of a disaster, if you haven't established that trust beforehand, you've got to storm norm and perform during the hurricane or the storm, and we don't want to do that. So it's absolutely key, those exercises are, to building trust in that whole of government team.
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of, not only, flying the space shuttle simulator, but at times we also do tabletop a lot of different scenarios that often are rather complex. And in Arizona, right now, as you know, we've had, it's the worst drought in our country's history. In Arizona's history, I've got a subcommittee hearing on this specific issue later today to discuss, what do we do here going forward to mitigate for this drought. And as we have, because of climate issues we're facing, we've had one of our worst wildfire seasons. And as you know, after the fire, if it rains, comes the flooding. And we've been dealing with that. So I appreciate you doing this. I've got another question about Corps benefit cost ratio, General. As you know, the Corps makes most construction and investigation investments based on a project's benefit to cost ratio as a way to measure the value of the project. What value that project will provide to the surrounding community, including preventing a worst-case scenario during a disaster. And I, like many senators on this committee, support efforts to ensure that a project's benefit to cost ratio reflects not just the monetary value of property damage, but the risks to life and health of those affected by a potential Corps project. So, General, when you look across the country, do you believe the Corps does a good job at prioritizing investments in the construction and investigation projects which are most likely to prevent future disasters?
Senator Kelly, thank you for that question. On anything we do, there's always room for improvement. For the benefits that you spoke of, we often evaluate a project primarily on its national economic development benefits. We're working now to incorporate there's three other benefits, and those are the regional economic benefits, other societal effects, and the environmental benefits as well. So those include the life, health, safety that you just spoke to. So we want to make sure that we are including all of those when we design our studies.
Well, thank you, General Graham, and thank you to all of you for being here today. And I yield back 18 seconds.
We appreciate each one of those 18 seconds. Senator Kelly, thanks. I know you had a full plate this morning. Thanks for making time to come by and participate. I had, before I recognized Senator Kelly, was talking to General Graham about climate change and project design, and I had asked, does the Corps currently account for climate change in its design process for flood risk management projects? And so you were good enough to answer that. And I want to do a follow-up to that question for the rest of the panel, if I could. And that would be, how does the Corps adapt its design processes with the rapid advances in science and our increased understanding of the interconnectivity of these systems, keeping in mind the increased frequency and intensity of climate-related impacts into our future? And General Tickner, would you like to take a shot at that, and Colonel, and then we'll come back to General Graham.
Chairman Carper, thanks for the question.
Sure.
And we have lots of projects on the Northeast that we're studying, and we do take the current science, the existing engineering that's out there that's really not changing, but this science and the new data that's coming in with climate change is adjusting our projects. And you see that on the coastal projects that we have in Delaware and New Jersey and Maryland with the dune systems that we have. But it also is going on to all our flood risk management projects as we look at the potential amount of water that's got to pass through safely past urban areas and to where we're going to let it expand or go out to sea.
All right. Colonel Murphy, anything you want to add to this?
I'd say down in the Mississippi, Chairman, I'd say down in the Mississippi Valley Division, which is my higher headquarters, we have the Engineer Research and Development Center, which is a Corps of Engineers. And for a lot of our issues, we are working closely with them to get, they are our lead for science, technology, and I can tell you just on studies on the lower Mississippi River, we are incorporating the best science and data that they've helped provide us.
All right, thank you. General Graham, anything else you want to add before we turn the page?
Just to reemphasize the
Yeah.
research and development aspects of this, which is we know the world's changing, and to make sure that we're on a solid foundation of science is absolutely critical.
All right, thank you. We ought to be guided by science, not blinded by science. That's good. General Tickner, if I could, another question for you regarding flooding impacts in urban areas. Not like what we saw in the greater Wilmington, Delaware area when this hurricane came through. But General Tickner, your command covers, as we know, the North Atlantic region, which includes some of the most densely populated areas in our nation. While Ida had significantly weakened by the time it made its way up the East Coast, it nevertheless produced devastating impacts throughout our region, including in my home state of Delaware. Could you just describe for us briefly some of the specific challenges that the Corps faces in conducting flood response in urban environments, and how did you overcome them, and how might we better overcome them in the future?
Chairman Carper, thank you for the question. And it is a shared response. We're working very closely with all the states, definitely Delaware, but through all the states in the Northeast. And it's a combination of, structural things that the Corps of Engineers would come up with, but non-structural, moving folks out of the floodplain. It's allowing the water to expand into certain areas like parks or other environmental habitat. It's other educational tools to allow people to know what could happen in their area, river gauges, installing more of them, which goes right to the early warning systems. One of the successes that I've heard from the states was they were able to warn their citizens, through the automated systems that were out there. They knew flash flooding was happening because of the river gauges, and so they were. It's a partnership, and a shared responsibility.
All right, thank you. General Graham, a different question, if I might, and that one that deals with environmental justice communities. There's a lot of them in my state and around the country. But General Graham, despite the recent supplemental bills that have provided a significant increase in federal investments for critical infrastructure, the impact of storms like Ida will always disproportionately affect those who may not have the means to evacuate in a timely manner, especially those in economically disadvantaged communities with large environmental justice populations. And rather than mitigating the damage from these storms on the back end, it's imperative that we invest upfront to protect those communities that need the most to help. And my question would be, would you just discuss with us for a bit how the Corps is specifically helping these communities from future storms or natural disasters?
Chairman Carbergen, thank you for that question. The guidance we received from President Biden is absolutely clear to focus the federal investments on environmental justice. One of the areas, and I'll focus up in the Northeast, would be the back bays. We've put coastal storm risk management systems, the berm and dune systems that you're familiar with, on the parts of the coast facing the oceans. But a lot of the flooding also happens around the back bays, and oftentimes that the folks that live back there aren't as well off, and there's a great deal of environmental justice concerns back there. So we're formulating a bunch of those projects. Certainly, General Tickner is right now, and those will soon be, some of them have already been in front of this committee, and some of the larger ones will soon be there. But I think that's how we're, one aspect of how we're getting at that.
All right, thank you. I have more questions I'd like to ask, but I'm needed back at the Homeland Security Government Affairs markup, the business meeting. So they're saving you from any further damage that I might inflict. Actually, I've not inflicted any. You've been very forthright and I think clear-minded in your responses. I just want to have a brief closing statement here, and then you can look for a couple more questions for the record that I would like to have asked, and you'll receive those shortly. Before we adjourn, a little bit of housekeeping. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that include letters from stakeholders and other materials that relate to today's hearing. And asking unanimous consent when I'm the only one in the room, that's a pretty easy thing to do, so no objection. Additionally, senators will be allowed to submit questions for the record through close of business on Wednesday, October 20th. And we'll compile those questions. We'll send them to our witness. We ask that you try to reply to us by Wednesday, November the 3rd. And in closing, I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony today. I really want to thank you for your continued service to our nation. As someone who spent a few years in uniform myself, I have huge respect for the work that you and the men and women you lead do for our nation. I know of so many of your teams, both civilian and military, work around the clock to help Americans who are suffering in the wake of these disasters. And we're grateful for your work. We want to make sure the Corps is equipped with the resources it needs to carry out your missions and fortify communities amidst a worsening climate crisis. And I don't have any other unanimous consent requests, do I? No? Okay. All right. With that, we're dismissed. Thank you again so much. Great to see you all.